Right, welcome everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for coming along to the first report out of 2020. Hey, yes, fantastic. And I really appreciate actually you coming along, given the operational pressures we've been handling this week and indeed over the festive period, which have been significant. But as ever, teams are doing magnificent work to keep patients safe and manage the pressures really admirably. So thank you. First report out is chemotherapy bleep pathway, and I think we've got Shafali, Alex and Helen, if my agenda is correct, coming to present.
Hello. There's been some changes. It's just me today.
There's been some changes. Just yes, you, Alex. Yes. Oh well, yeah, good man. I think you know. So, are you doing it all on your own, son?
Yeah.
But Shafali's
has
in
an
there.
Email from
She's supporting
Helen.
you. Right. Okay.
Helen's unfortunately she sent an email which we'll read out, but
okay.
The chemotherapy unit has a lot of sickness.
Yeah. No, understood. Well, that's great. Well, do what you can, and we'll look forward to hearing about it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Right. Hello everybody, thank you for having me here. My name's Alex, I'm one of the core medical trainees based in the haematology department down in level 3 here in the wonderful Bexley wing, and I'm here today to talk to you about a project that we've been doing over the last 6 months, improving the chemo bleep. Now, what is the chemo bleep? Those of you who are familiar with the oncology department will know that on J80 we have the down on level 1 the chemotherapy day unit, which is where patients attend as a day case to come and have their typically infusions of chemotherapy. The nurse is run by a team of very knowledgeable, helpful, enthusiastic nurses, but there are sometimes occasions when patients get unwell and need a doctor to come and see them. So what happens in that instance is the nurses will initially assess the patient and administer initial treatment if they deem that that's what they think they need to do, typically hydrocortisone chlorphenamine for allergic type reactions, and then they will get in contact with us. The chemo bleep is a baton bleep which is passed amongst the SHOs from the oncology and haematology teams. So we're based up on levels 3, 4 and 5 of Bexley Wing, and when that bleep goes off, we're expected to attend straight away down to the chemotherapy unit. And what we do is go and find the patient with the assistance of the nurses and perform an A to E assessment. And if there's any further management that we need to instigate at that point, we do that. Whilst that's happening, the nurses who are responsible for the patient will contact the registrars and get a plan for what to do with the chemotherapy, whether it's to stop for the day, continue at a slower rate, and then arrange for attending again for a further infusion at a later date, or just abandoning that chemotherapy altogether. So with the previous cohort of SHOs who were responsible for this bleep, there was some dissatisfaction with the way the system worked. So we put a team together, of which I was part. Shafali kind of headed the whole thing up, and we collected some data on what the issues were, what was making people dissatisfied. And the two biggest problems, as you can see, were the fact that they're all crash bleeps, which is this drop and run type picture where you can't call the ward to find out what's going on first, you're just expected to attend straight away. The other main area of dissatisfaction was some uncertainty about what the roles of each of the individuals, i.e. the SHO and the nurse, was, and I'll go into that a little bit more. People felt that they were spending too much time on the unit and that the bleeps were happening quite frequently. So we collected some we set targets about what we'd like to improve first of all. First of all, we need to know what the starting point is, so we collected some data about how many bleeps there were happening per week. We needed to make sure that everyone understood their roles properly, because clearly that wasn't the case beforehand. We aimed to reduce the number of these crash bleeps by 50%, and we were hoping to reduce the amount of time that the SHOs spent on the ward reviewing patients, because it shouldn't take longer than 15 minutes really to review a stable patient. So the way that, this was the baseline data that we collected, looking at the number of bleeps which occurred over a series of weeks. Typically there were about 2 bleeps per week, and in this initial period all of those were treated as crash bleeps where you drop and run. Out of all of those reactions, only 2 were deemed to be unstable. These are the people who need further management and might take a bit longer to manage. There were 5 deviations from the expected roles and responsibilities, i.e. the nurses weren't contacting the registrars, had expected the SHOs to do that, and that was what fed into SHOs often spending a bit more time on the ward, because it could take some time to get hold of the registrars. So the way we wanted to fix this problem is make sure that we had the right person in the right place for the right amount of time, to just get things working efficiently and making sure that the workload was managed properly. And the way we did this was creating a 2-tier system for the chemotherapy reactions. So the nurses would, as before, triage the patients and deem whether they thought they were stable or unstable. If they were deemed to be stable, instead of just the SHOs attending straight away, the SHOs were expected then to call the number from the extension and discuss with the nurse what the issue was, what reaction they were having, and establish when they could come down to review the patient. In the incidents where the patients were unstable, rather than putting the extension from the phone that the nurse was calling from, they put in 99999, and we would attend straight away. And that meant that we could manage our workload, in that if we were with an unstable patient on the wards, and we received a bleep about a stable patient down in the chemotherapy unit, we could say, okay, I will be with you as soon as possible, give me 15-20 minutes just to tie this up, hand over the bits that I need to do. And that was part of how we thought we could make the whole system work better. We had some education for the nurses and the SHOs, formally clarifying those roles of A to E assessment and initial management for the SHOs, and registrars to be contacted by the nurses. And hopefully in that way we decrease the amount of time spent on the ward, things run more efficiently, patients are managed safely. So that's what we did. There was a similar poster that we put up for the ward doctors, so everyone, the doctors and the nurses, understood their roles within this system. And we also, so then we moved on, and the arrow here is to indicate where we did all of this, instigated the new pathway, and continued to collect data on the frequency of bleeps, and found it to be roughly the same. So, a further 8 weeks of data gathering showed that, the number of bleeps was about the same, but what we did succeed in doing was getting rid of this crash bleep being the only option, and only 3 of the bleeps out of that total of 32 reactions were unstable drop and run, so that's well beyond the 50% that we were aiming for in reduction. In every case, there was absolute agreement between the doctors and the nurses about what constituted unstable or stable patients, so that was really reassuring. And at that time, everyone understood their roles and stuck to doing what they were supposed to do, so things ran more efficiently. As a balance measure, there was one reported non-answering of the bleep. The exact reasoning behind this I'm not sure of, but I know that things happen. Sometimes bleeps stop working. It happened last week. When that does happen, we go to bedboard, get it fixed, and use an alternative bleep number. So there's a workaround. So we achieved our second goal, which was to reduce the number of chemo bleeps by 50%, crash bleeps by 50%. The amount of time spent on the unit, looking at these trends, you can see there was a slight reduction, and we managed to reach that 15-minute goal, which is good. Part of what that the way in which we allowed that to happen was a bit of teaching for the SHOs on what to expect from chemotherapy reactions and how to manage them, basically. So this was the data from the previous cohort who were not happy about how things worked. This is after we had made our interventions. You can see crash bleeps, no longer an issue. Bleep frequency, no longer an issue. Though the actual number of bleeps didn't change, we feel that because they weren't crash bleeps, it didn't feel like such a burden in terms of your workload because you could manage it more effectively. The clarification of what everybody's roles were was better, and people spent less time on the unit. The one interesting quirk was that it seemed that the SHOs were less certain about what to do with chemotherapy reactions. We put our heads together and thought about this and thought maybe it's because we've had this teaching session and said these are all of the different reactions, and the SHOs were taking it upon themselves to think more into the kind of registrar role of what we need to do next, whereas their role was really just the A to E, keep it simple, make sure the patient's safe, and look after them until another plan is instituted. So as you can see, we succeeded in reducing the dissatisfaction. Everyone was either just okay with it or quite satisfied with how it works, and that has persisted. I've spoken to some of the SHOs in the last few days and they feel that the system works quite well. So in conclusion, we managed to, after our intervention, had 0% dissatisfaction with the chemo bleep system. The crash bleep burden was reduced from 100% to 9%. People will always be unstable at some point, so you need to have that system in place. The median number of bleeps per week is obviously consistent because people will continue to have reactions at the same kind of rate. And we reduced the time spent on the unit to the aim of 15 minutes. So that's that. And now, thank you. Now we'll just have the email from Helen.
Yes, sure.
Helen Carter is a senior sister in the chemotherapy unit who's passed her apologies. She's supposed to be here, but there's been quite some sickness amongst the staff, so she's working. But she's just said that my feedback is 100% of the nursing staff have used the reaction bleep before and after changes. The nurses feel confident to know if the need for review is immediate or not. They have the backup of the 9999 system if the patient should deteriorate in the time being, and they find that very reassuring. A lot of the times they feel that the SHO comes down straight away if they're free, which is great, so there's good teamwork there. And the main issues is still the time it takes to contact the primary team for a plan for the chemo, so the registrars and the consultants. But the nurses feel that's quite positive, that at least this is not impacting on the SHO workload, and that the general impression is that everyone's quite happy.
Great, fantastic. Alex, Shefali, thank you very much, and we will, as ever, I'm sure there'll be some questions for you, but we'll hold those to the end if you can stick with it. But really good to see the work that's gone on and the obvious progress in a relatively short time, so yeah. That's great. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to the next report out, which is the ED value stream on Kaizen Event 2, Paediatric Nurse Assessment, and I think we've got Simon. Is this a solo act, Simon? Excellent. No, that's good. That's good. Don't apologise. Looking forward to it.
So my name's Simon Rush. I'm the lead paediatric advanced practitioner in children's emergency medicine, and I'm the joint process owner of this volume stream along with Helen Mallard, our lead clinician. So this is our 30-day report out. In December we identified that a lot of our children there was quite a long period of time that they were taking to be assessed, and actually when children arrive into the department, that's one of the key processes, is making sure that they're safe and having a timely assessment to make sure they're safe to wait to be seen. In the initial volume stream, we did a lot of work and assessed around what barriers there were to nursing assessment, and the reasons it was taking such a long time for some children to be assessed. And a lot of the things we found were that the assessment nurses were being interrupted, there was lots of movement of the patient and the staff during an assessment for a child, and that there was lots of lengthy conversations, and some of the more junior nursing staff weren't actually understanding what the process of a nursing assessment in the ED, what the actual outcome of that assessment was, which was to make sure that the patient was safe. So we put some steps in place to try and reduce our assessment process that initially was a 13-step assessment process for the patient down to a 5-step assessment process. And the initial results we had were actually very reassuring. So the main things that we measured were the lead time, which was the time that it was taking on average per patient for a nursing assessment, from the moment that the nurse called them into the room to the moment that the patient would be ready to see a clinician. And our initial lead time was 24 minutes 53 seconds per patient, which we see approximately 100 to 120 children a day. So that doesn't fit into a 24-hour period, so we knew there was something that needed to be done. We managed to reduce that by the last report out to 5 minutes 51 per patient. Although at the time we recognised that there was some bias in that we as the value stream team were in the ED, often actually taking away some of the things that were distracting the nursing team. So when I've gone out and subsequently done further observations, what's reassuring is we've still managed to maintain a reduction down to about 8 minutes 50 seconds, but also identified some areas that we can improve, which I'll talk about later. The main measure was the number of children waiting for assessment, and we were taking that number at a specific point in time to look at have we improved our number of children waiting for assessment. Initially, we dropped that down to 8 patients waiting for assessment at the time, and we're down again to about 5, although again there's some slight bias around that number, which I'll talk about later as well. What is useful is that one of the main things we wanted to reduce was the interruptions to the assessing nurse, and by setting up processes, i.e. making sure that our rooms are set effectively so that the nurses aren't having to go in and out of the rooms to find equipment, to speak to other people, that has actually reduced the number of interruptions from 56% of patients were interrupted during a nurse assessment down to 22% at the moment, and there's still some further work ongoing to reduce that even further. So our newspaper, the main things that we're still working on, so our 5S to try and make the rooms set and standard is ongoing, and we do have a fixed standard structure in place, although there's sometimes the rooms aren't being restocked to the level that they should be, and that some of the equipment is being taken and moved and not returned, so that's something that later on this week we're going to work on again to try and standardise a little bit more. One of the things we tried to do was allocate a nurse into a room so that the nurse stayed in that room and was working from that one room so that it would increase their productivity over the day. That unfortunately still isn't happening on a day-to-day basis due to some of the barriers, again, that we'll talk about in a moment, but that's something that myself and Jess Swindon, one of the children's sisters, is looking at in the next 30 days until the next report out to try and improve that. And we tried to instigate this tag team approach to assessment, which was that a nurse and a senior nurse or a nurse and a CSW would go into the room to do observations and the assessment at the same time. That's proved slightly difficult because of the staffing numbers that we have at the moment to be able to facilitate that number of people per patient. There are some occasions that it works really well, and that tends to be during the day when we have more staff on at a set period of time, and later into the evening is becoming problematic, although we've changed our staffing levels and that might get better as well, hopefully. So the main barriers, which was staffing, so the number of staff to enable us to do some of the aspects of this process. Also, so the wait for clinician, which is our measure, we may have 15 children booking in an hour, or we may have 2 children booking in an hour. What we're hoping to see is that by reducing the assessment time per patient, we will eventually reduce the number of children waiting. But if we have 15 children booking in an hour and it's taking us just about 8 minutes per patient, that will subsequently obviously increase the wait for clinicians. So that's also resource activity. When we get a resource patient in which is excluded from this data, but it takes a nursing member of team away to go and look after that patient, and therefore that then will impact on the wait for clinician of non-emergency or non-urgent patients that come through into the department. And equipment as well. There are big pieces of equipment that there is no benefit to having 17 of. So we still on certain occasions have to go and find, for example, an ECG machine that there's no benefit to us having more than one in PZD, or the carbon monoxide monitor, etc. So that still we won't get rid of the interruptions totally, unfortunately. Moving forward, so we've got set this week to relook at the 5S and the room allocation, and we're going to actually change it on the daily allocation sheet so that the nurses are allocated into a room on the allocation sheet so they know where they're working from each day. What's really positive is that we've had quite a lot of new staff come into the department at the moment, and they like the process when they're working with one of the senior nurses because they're learning and developing a lot more and they're getting a lot of skills out of it, and that's been really useful to support our junior nursing team and also some of our clinical support staff that are getting to work with more senior experienced members of the team to learn and develop themselves. And again, we're going to allocate the daily room to the assessment for the nursing team.
Great. Well done. Thank you very much. Good progress. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks very much, Simon. And it's obvious that continuing to make progress, and it's a really important area for us as well, so that's good. Looking forward to the be 60 days next, won't it? Yeah. Okay, good. Right, next up we've got report out from adult cardiac surgery value stream, RPIW4, acute referrals, and we've got Amy and Neville. Yeah, good. Okay, over to you.
Hello, my name's Neville. I'm the business manager for cardiac surgery, and I had the pleasure of being the sponsor for this RPIW. Sorry, I just found the presentation. So this is our 60-day report out for our 4th RPIW. For this RPIW, we knew we wanted to review our urgent patient pathway, and so where's best to start then from the beginning, from where the patient gets referred into our service. Our urgent patient scheduling pathway is one that involves patients not only from our own bed base but from 7 other hospital trusts throughout Yorkshire, which creates its own intricacies. Compared to other RPIWs, this created the unique challenge of engaging with external stakeholders regularly through the week to gauge their perception of our service, what changes we wanted to trial, and also the effects that those changes had. The key aims that we wanted to achieve from the week was to reduce the time it took to make a decision on the patient's need and suitability for cardiac surgery, and also improve communication with all stakeholders throughout the process. So during the week and leading up to the week, we found that on average it took more than 63 hours from receipt of the referral to make an initial decision on the need for surgery. 40% of referrals had defects that resulted in a delay in the referral being passed on to a surgeon for review, and therefore creating a delay in the process. The referral form was seen as complex with a lack of clarity on requirements. Referrers felt that the service was a bit of a black hole, so they would send the referral in and then there was not much feedback from the team. Patients similarly felt in the dark. Yeah. Just down there. And patients similarly felt the same, that they were in the dark once they'd been told that they were being referred for cardiac surgery. There was very little feedback from the team. So what did we do and what did we implement? We used the 5S methodology to review the referral form to ensure that the information that we were receiving was essential and required. We also created a guide for referrers as to how to complete the form and what was needed for each section. We took the simple step of an acknowledgement email, so when we receive the referral, an email will go straight back to the referrer, that the referral was being dealt with, and then beyond that point there was regular updates with the teams that had referred into the service. Amy now calls to see every patient that's been referred, that's based at LGI, to say that they've been referred, and still goes to see each patient individually as they pass through the patient pathway. So after 60 days, what have we achieved? So we've achieved a reduction by 50% in the number of defects found on referrals into the service, and this is due to simplifying the referral form and also giving a guide to the referrers. Feedback and communication so far is that it has improved for both referrers and patients, and due to the changes in the referral form, the surgeons are now able to give an outcome to Amy much quicker, but also with a prioritising outcome and how quickly those patients need to have their surgery. But most of all, an overall reduction in lead time from 63 hours to just over 17 hours, which is a reduction of 73%. So our next steps, by day 92, are hoping to have this part of the process fully operational and embedded as business as usual. Once all our stakeholders are happy with the current email form, we're looking to fully electronicise that and maybe look at using patient pass system. The biggest delay currently is at the weekend when the surgeons don't have access to the electronic referrals and also the diagnostics that's sent with the referral form. So we're looking at that and how they can access it from either home or some other form method. So in summary, we've reduced the waiting times for acute surgery and improved patient experience based on feedback. We've had a significant reduction in defects on referrals coming, and the guidance that was implemented seems to be working. Communication has been a key part of our journey to making improvements, and moving forward we would like to continue to improve the process and reduce the waiting times even further. I did say at the beginning that it was my pleasure to be the sponsor for this, and the team's approach to this was fantastic. I walked away with very little to do at the end of that week and during that week, so it was a thank you to the team, but they did really well, and the biggest hurdle for them is the communication with the other 7 trusts, which the other 7 trusts really took on board what we were trying to do as well. So thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Thanks very much, Neville, Amy. I'm sure there was a lot in there that I'm sure we want to tease out in questions, and particularly some of the impact in other organisations across Wyatt. I'm sure the point you made, Neville, at the end about the collaboration is an important one. So plenty, I'm sure, to come in terms of questions on that, but thank you very much. Right, the last of the 4 report outs today, before we get into hopefully a bit of time for Q&A, is on the ED value stream. Good to see you, Jane. Kaizen Event 1 and RPIW 2 on cubicles and shared spaces. Your regular slot, I think.
I quite like it behind you now. If I can get my slides up. Oh God. Oh. Whereabouts am I? Thank you.
Which one is it? Is it that one?
Can't even blooming say.
90 day.
90 day, yeah.
No. This one?
Yeah.
Or that one?
That's not me.
Okay. This.
That's it, yeah. That's the first, that's the last slide.
That's the only one I got sent.
Oh no, they sent me a more.
Okay. Is it on PowerPoint?
Yeah. Mark did it this morning. So I did send it through.
Yeah, well, I got them, and that was
Oh, is it?
that was them.
Well, no,
So you've got key learning, 90-day report out,
well, that's the newspaper.
and then 90-day door. That's all
Yeah.
I got.
Yeah, so that.
So that's all there is.
So where's the TPR? So progress report's not there, is it?
Nope.
Right, just put the barriers in key line just to talk it through. What?
Okay, sorry about
Right. Sorry for that delay. It seems like the slides have not been uploaded. Sorry. So I will just talk about it. I'll talk through it. So this is our 90 day for adult ED at the LGI. I'm Jane and one of the sisters there. So just ignore that slide at the moment. So just a little bit of a recap. What we were looking at is the utilisation of our cubicles and how best to manage them for the patient and how best to give them a better outcome and a quicker response time within the ED. So we spent an intensive week looking at that and looking at our target progress report. Sorry, I'll have to kind of what we looked at and tagged on. We wanted to reduce the lead time of the clinicians in the room looking after the patients. We wanted to stop the breakup of the clinicians in and out of the rooms. So disrupting the patient, breaking that communication with them, and also clinicians wandering around looking for cubicles, not knowing where they were going, not knowing where they could go into. So we wanted to work on that. We also looked at the walking distance of staff as well. We wanted to keep our nurses in one place so we could coordinate that better. And we, to be fair, the walking distance hasn't changed dramatically. It's reduced a little bit in 90 days, but not anything significant. But I mean, still 742 for the clinicians over the hour and 594. Yeah, thank you. Well done. There we go. Right, brilliant, thank you. So this is what we looked at. So there's the walking distance. So as you can see, like I just said, it's pretty much been on a steady basis since then. It's the lead time that we're quite proud of, that we've reduced. From the baseline of 1 hour 27, and it's crept up a little bit for these 90 days, but it has been a particularly trying and difficult time. But still, that's a fantastic reduction in time that the patient, that the doctor or the clinician are working with the patient. So we're quite pleased with that, and we think that some of the steps that we've put into place has contributed to that, which I'll go through in a little bit. So when we were looking at the defects, just a couple of defects to talk about. We looked at our Symphony system, which is a computer system. I don't know if you're not used to it. It just tells us what patients we've got in, generally what's wrong with them and who needs to be seen. And we can plot in the department where they are. And that's what was confusing and frustrating for the clinicians, that at any one time they may not know where each of them patients were, because it didn't match where they were in the department. So we used a whiteboard system to kind of, and we did realise we were duplicating information a little bit there. And when we do it, it works. It's just when what we found was the more patients in the department, the more difficult that then becomes, because clinicians, we're just trying to get through that work. So we are still working on a better system of doing that, so a computerised system that will make that life a little bit easier, and we're not getting people to duplicate work. But what it has done, it is driving the clinicians through the Blue Team Coordinator so they know where the patients are generally. And we also looked at patients waiting in cubicles unnecessarily for tests that they didn't need to be in there for, and one of the tests that we picked up for when we first did it was people were waiting just for basic ECGs in cubicles. So we've kind of reduced that, and that's still at 0. And with that, we developed a quick turnaround room. So that was for clinicians to use, not keep patients in there. So nurses could use it, clinicians could use it, could discharge patients. You could take a quick set of bloods, you could take a cannula out, could discharge them. You could say, you're fine to go, thank you, bye. So they didn't need to stay in rooms to do that, and it's kind of one of our quick turnaround rooms, which we've called it. So what we've done is we've got like a covering for the door, so it's in rainbow colours, so it's noticeable, and it makes you think, why is it like that? And then there's signs on it that will say what it's to be used for. And hopefully that will address one of the frustrations for the clinicians when they just need a quick room. Oh, there's my door. There's my door. I like my door. I can't tell you how long it took just to get that design. It's ordered, it's ready to come and it's ready to be put up, so that should be up soon. I'm quite pleased with that. Anyway, so our newspaper, the two items that are left on the newspaper, I've developed quite a lot. Put the last one up if you want. I know.
I'm having a word with
Believe
KPO.
me, if he's having problems, I'd never get there.
Is that it?
Yeah, thank you.
And there's another one down, I think.
Down, yeah. So still on the newspaper was the whiteboard and the blue team coordinator, so we're still working on that and ways to improve that, but we know it works, so it's something we're sticking with. And the patient room, the smart cubicle, which is what we called it with the covering on it, so that should be 100% very shortly when that's on, and people will use it. So our two items left on the newspaper. That's finished. So the key, the barriers and the key learning. So what have we found over these last 90 days? That it's been quite intense. It's been a lot of work. So the teamwork and the driving of our new ways of working are key to successful change, even though we've had some difficult times. Some of the major things that we've achieved, we've got a cubicle storage system in each room now, so that allows the doctor or the clinician or the nurse to stay in the room and not come in and out. Then the tendon hammers are there, whatever they need is in the room, and that's cut down on a lot of that wasted time. We've also got an extra storage system outside, and we've been able to replicate that in our resource room as well, so it's give us ideas to work on elsewhere in the department because it works. We've also got ophthalmoscopes in every room, which was a huge achievement, really, because that was a real cost implication with that. So that is brilliant that they're not looking for that. So the clinicians are pleased that we've moved that forward, and that's just all contributes to that flow for the patient. So our aim for going forward is to continue to support the changes made and for it to become like business as usual or work as usual. This is what we do now, this is how it rolls. So I just wanted to end it kind of this 90-day on some what kind of personal things that I've learned through this, and I've just put that the hard work the real hard work started after the week, actually, to maintain it and to keep that going. There was a lot of input in that week, a lot of seniority, a lot of hours put into it, but afterwards it was that momentum to keep going, and we need that momentum or you can't embed that change. And without pulling a team together, none of this would have worked. There's no progression in isolation. It feels a bit isolated at the moment, but are you there? Thanks. So the positives, I think we've gained so much positives over this short period of time. That's what it's enabled us to do, is to be able to focus and do it, and we've had that permission to do it, which has been brilliant, and the time to do that. There are some items, like I've mentioned on the newspaper, but the other positive things, the room and the cubicles, storage and everything. So even though we're not completely 100% the strides we've made, I think we've done and achieved so much in that time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jane. Well done. It's great to see that lead time, isn't it? That's really impressive. And all the other benefits you've highlighted. So that's great, really good. Thank you very much. 4 great report outs. So a chance for questions. Just reflecting back on the last 40 minutes or so, we've had, I think, a really good range of report outs today. So who'd like to kick off with any questions or observations? I'll go to you in a moment, Yvette.
So we're an assessment area in SAU as well, and done loads of work around weight stakes and times triage. And we did do loads of PDSAs around our triage process in the room, but actually we found the better measure to be the weight state from the time the patient arrives to the time they actually get into the triage room. I just wondered if you thought anything or done any work around that.
Yeah, so our process, we have what we call a VET process, which is where we do just a very quick glance at the child to make sure there's nothing obvious that needs, and that process, thankfully, we actually keep under our 15-minute target. The further assessment is actually to think about any other interventions that might be needed prior to medical clinician assessment. But the whole thing altogether, what's useful is that the whole thing is reducing. It is something we definitely need to look at moving forward, because still we sometimes some of the questions that colleagues are asking might not be pertinent to why the child's there, and we're trying to reduce those kind of things through education, and we're starting to do some extra training with particularly the more junior team members.
Great. Yvette?
My question is for Alex and Mr. Shikari, but thank you, and it was a really good presentation, and really good to see that it was appreciated in terms of the change both by medics and nursing staff. One of your balloons at the end was still about understanding what to do when you go to a patient who is having a reaction. I think you said, I think it was 37% still
Yes.
not sure.
Yes.
And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about what you might do on that one.
So, I think it's further education about what it's interesting, because what we wanted to do was increase people's confidence by saying these are the different types of chemotherapy reactions and what you can expect. We didn't intend for people to then feel that they had an extra burden of work in terms of dealing with those complications. We just wanted people to know that their role is the A to E assessment, and you're just making sure that that patient is stable and doesn't need immediate intervention like fluids or further medications. What we will do is I'm intending to re-audit and collect a bit more data about how the process is working now, and once we've done that, if that persists as an issue, if that area of uncertainty is still there, then we can organise another session where we talk to people and say, this is for your learning interests, so that you can become more rounded clinicians generally. But don't worry, your role in this system is still just doing the basics here.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. Other comments?
It was a question really from respiratory, I think, in terms of the cancer patients referred from external units in, we recognise that's a big area of waste in terms of lack of information between underperformers and the chase around that. I'm just interested how far you went to engage your external referring units. I mean, did you bring them actually in, or did you get any pushback from them?
No, they were all quite keen to get involved actually, because obviously their drive is to get patients out of their bed base, so the sooner they can do that, the better. One of the biggest issues we found is we had a really keen FY2 who had rotated through cardiac surgery, and the issue they were finding was that when they started with the cardiology service, their experience was very limited, so there was much more defects in the referral forms. By the end of the 6 months, when they were better at it, the referral form was much better. But the DGHs were really keen to get involved. Due to it being a full week, they couldn't actually spare anybody. But on a daily basis, Joe was communicating with them about what they wanted and how they were going to improve it. And we've had really positive feedback from each one.
Great. Excellent. Any other final questions or comments? Anything, Simon, from your perspective as sort of exec sponsor on this?
I'd like to say another really great example from another cardiac significant improvement. So I suppose I was going to ask a sort of follow-on to that question then. So we're great in reduction in defects in the forms, but there still are some. Yeah. So I wondered what our sort of next round of improvement would be.
The next step is to review the form again, go through the 5 S's just to make sure that everything's there. And again, it's that understanding from the satellite hospitals about what we need and why do we need all that information. That actually it's that form that the surgeons use to take it forward to speed up that process. And realistically, we should be doing surgery in 7 days. So we want as much information on that as possible before we bring the patient over, and then hopefully we won't have to say, more information better. So it's giving them that understanding that it's a lot of information.
Okay. Great. We'll round off there. Just a comment really, I'm struck by today the work that's gone on in terms of excuse me, the stage that we're at with each of these, and it's really good to see, in a sense, we've gone on a journey through a time series of improvement work from starting out right through to 90 days. Your value stream, And I think the point you made about momentum and engagement and continuing this, often we find with improvement projects, certainly in the past in the NHS, a burst of enthusiasm at the start, but then a sort of fade and erosion of them. This is all about sustainability and the reliability and the standard work, and so it's really good to see how all of you today have started to embed and develop that, and I just want to kind of underline that point as a key part of the Leeds improvement method from today's report out. So thanks very much to all of you for reporting out. It's been really good, really enjoyed it, and particularly at a time when we've been under enormous pressure. Appreciate everyone's efforts and look forward to our next report out. So thanks very much.